So, and without further ado, as you know, our guest needs no further introduction. We all know him. We've been inspired by the work that he's done with reinventing organizations. But this time, Frederic will actually share a little bit of the new project that he's working on, which is the week and the journey that took him there. So yeah, I'm super excited about this. And so yeah, Frederic, come and join me over here. Thank you.
Hello there.
So Frederic, do you have any words for our community here? We have around 162 people in this session today.
Yeah, I'm just so excited to be part of this. I don't do this very often, and so I'm really excited. When I come into this thing, I'm still sort of pinching myself, like, all these people want to listen to me. Like, what do I have to say? So I'm, it's like, okay, we'll find out what, if there's anything interesting coming out. But I'm just so happy to be with you.
So we are all about emergence, right? So for this session, we really want to tap into that and really hear what is coming up for you and what questions are there, and those deep questions that you want to ask Frederic. Please prepare them, share them with us. We're very excited to see them. But before we go there, Frederic, I'd like to play a little game if you don't mind.
Okay, go for it.
Great. So let's play a lightning round of random questions because we want to get to know you in your most human state, let's say. And I'm very curious. So are you ready?
Go for it.
Yeah, cool. So basically, I have a few questions and you can answer it with a phrase or a choice between two things, or you can say pass.
Okay.
All right. So my first question is, what's your favorite day of the week?
I don't know. I still have a playlist on my phone, which is the Friday night playlist that used to be from my work like a long time ago when I was at McKinsey, and I was so glad it was weekend and it was like this music to just like get all of the energy out. It's Friday. And it's so funny for me to notice that I still have this on my phone, but I no longer need it because I no longer have these. But yeah, I think Saturdays, I have two amazing children, and just, the Saturday of like just being fully with them is amazing.
Yeah. That's cool. So Saturday is Frederic's favorite day of the week. Next question. Would you rather be able to speak every language in the world or speak to animals?
Oh, easy. Animals. Can I add trees? I often think about like, what is the consciousness of my cat? What is the consciousness of a bee? What is I just love for like 10 minutes to be able to see the world through those eyes. One of the books I've loved most, if you haven't read it, is Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. Mm-hmm. She's this scientist from a Native American lineage. And so she has a scientist and this Native American perspective. And she talks in that book so beautifully about how we in the West tend to think of us as the apex of creation, right? Like humans as the top of the pyramid, right? And she says how in her native tradition, they think really actually in evolutionary terms, and as humans as the little brother of creation. Like we've just been around for very little. And so a lot of other animals and plants and trees have been around for millions of years before us. So they're much wiser than us. And I found that perspective just so refreshing, to think of us as little brothers of creation and like trees as being like these beings that have so much more wisdom than us. And it just like shifted something in my mind. So how cool would it be to be able to communicate with trees and with animals?
That's really fascinating. And for those who missed it, there's a conversation in the chat about the link to the book, Braiding Sweetgrass. So do check it out. I have another question. If you could travel back in time, and we know that reinventing organizations with the different colors also had a little bit of time component in it. If you could travel back in time, which period would you revisit?
Two answers. One is hunter-gatherer time. Some of you might be, in these conversations, like, agriculture is when everything went wrong, and, hunter-gatherers, and I'd be really interested in that. Like, I've read a little bit about some hunter-gatherer tribes and how they've been very careful to stay egalitarian and to make sure that no one gains a bigger status. So if you're an amazing hunter, there's a risk that status becomes too high. So people mock the meat that you kill and say it's disgusting. And so they have all these mechanisms to ensure, right? And so I'm thinking about that a lot. And the other period I want to move to is now. There's Joanna Macy, this amazing environmental, veteran and also spiritual person who says, like, this is the most exciting time to be alive. We have like these amazing challenges, and we're going to talk about, climate change and destruction of our planet, and this race between destruction and consciousness that we're in right now. And she says of any time she would want to be alive now, and I agree with her.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, another question is, would you ask permission or beg for forgiveness?
Pass.
If there were no cars, what would be your favorite form of transportation?
Oh, I have sometimes these dreams where I fly. I don't know, raise your hand if you have the same dreams every once in a while, and it's just the most beautiful thing. So
fly without fuel, right?
Yeah, totally. It's like, lift off.
That's so cool. Well, so much for this game. I'd love to ask a more serious question now. And this has something to do with most of us who has read the book Reinventing Organization, and somehow we all landed and got bonded in this community together because of that book and because of the TL ideals that we are pursuing. So personally for me, this has been perspective altering when I read it. And I think many can agree that it has been impactful to them in, well, many different ways. So a few of us are curious about your journey so far from when you wrote the book till now. Yeah, so when you look back from where you are at this moment to the time that maybe you started writing the book, or you have published the book, is there anything that you would frame differently or add, take away?
Okay, so here two things, sort of my own journey and content-wise.
Yeah.
One of the persons that I quote a lot in the book is Parker Palmer. He's an author that just influenced me a huge amount, and he talks so beautifully about shifting his perspective from living the life that he thought he was supposed to lead, right? In his case, it wasn't a corporate life. In his case, he thought that he was meant to be a monk and have a spiritual life, until he had sort of depression, and like life told him like that's not what he was meant to do, right? And so he talks about shifting from the life that he thought he was meant to live to the life that wants to be lived through him. And I find that such a beautiful and liberating perspective. Thinking like, I don't actually need to make plans for my life, but I can just simply listen to the life that wants to be lived through me. And so for me, like, everything in my system relaxes. Like I no longer have to cling to an identity or to a plan, but I can just listen. And so Reinventing Organization really was the result of one of those listenings of like, I just felt like this was the book I was meant to research and then write. And so since then, I've been just curious to observe, like, what did I feel was wanting, to be lived through me. And one of the surprises was that when the book came out, it became successful way beyond anything I had expected. And I got lots of requests to do speaking engagements, and I had leadership groups that wanted to meet with me. And when I did, it felt so incredibly meaningful. Like, I love being on stage. I love having a leadership team for a day and having no idea what they want to talk about, and then being in the moment, and so I absolutely loved it. I felt in my strength, and yet everything in me said that I was not supposed to do that. And it felt very, very strange because it's, I love to do it. I feel I'm good at doing it. And I just heard with clarity that the answer was like, no, I was not meant to be speaking every night, and I was not meant to consult around this. And so I, as some of you know, I declined pretty much everything, 99% of all the inquiries, because I felt like, and I'm not sure why that is, because it would have been fun. And when I see this group, I'm thinking that maybe that is the reason. If I had been too central stage, then maybe this might not have happened. Whereas here, you felt empowered to just create deal around the world and, just run with it and create something. So, yeah, my life since then has been pretty, pretty private. I, spending a lot of time with my children. I did this video series, Insights for the Journey. Maybe you can link to that, because I've done a terrible job, but a lot of people don't know that it even exists. But so this video series, Insights for the Journey, is like 130 videos that I created after the week, with everything that I've learned since, talking to, every once in a while, to organizations that, go through this process of reinventing themselves. So that kept me busy for a while. It also coincided with me moving from my native Belgium to a wonderful eco-village, and so for more of a community life in upstate New York. And so that was a big change in my life. And then 3 years ago I started working on this new project, The Week, that we might talk about. So that's in a nutshell. And maybe one more thing that comes up for me is, it was interesting for me to see how many questions I got from people who were interested to talk with me, not so much about Reinventing Organizations, the book, but more about my life and the choices I was making. And at first I was just so surprised by that, because I was like, yeah, sure, I can talk about my life, but like, how interesting is that? And then I realized that just how deep, we live in this, the story of more, right? That tells us that we should always maximize everything, right? We should maximize, not only profits and market share, but we should maximize our careers. We should, maximize, the number of followers we have. We should, and I realized like how deep there seems to be a longing for people to have an excuse not to maximize. I remember, so this is years ago when I was working at McKinsey, and obviously I wasn't meant, that it wasn't very interesting to me, but I didn't know what else to do with my life. And I remember there was a colleague, very young, who was the same age as me at the time, who had cancer. And it was a shock that, this young guy had cancer. And I remember that the voice that came up in my head was, if only I had that excuse. Right? If only I had the excuse of cancer to leave McKinsey, and, and basically what that voice I think was saying was, have that excuse to stop, going for the next thing. And, because then everybody would understand, oh yeah, of course he has cancer, he's looking for deeper, meaningful things in his life. And when I heard that voice, I was in shock. I was like, okay, shit, I need to do something about this. And so I feel like a lot of us are looking to escape that, ethos of maximization. And I think so many of the questions I got was because people were surprised. Like, everybody assumes, like, if you're a successful author, then you go in the speaking circuit and you maximize that, and then you could create a consulting firm around it. And we just have these assumptions that's what you're supposed to do, right? And so I've just had many beautiful conversations around this in the years of, like, what does a life outside of maximization look like? And how do we then measure ourselves, and how do we measure the the meaningfulness of our life? So that's been very present for me. And then you were asking content-wise, like, what did I learn? I mean, obviously I learned a lot about that. There's this one chapter in the third part about, like, hey, if you're an existing organization and you want to go there, right? Like, what, how does that go? And at the time, I was basing this just on a few of the companies I researched that had been traditional companies, and since then, I've made this video series with just so much more. I think we've just learned so much more over the last years. So that's an obvious one. I think there's 2 or 3 things that otherwise stand out for me. One thing is that it was only after the book was published that I really started grappling with gender dynamics and patriarchy, and what it is to be raised, as a man or a woman or somebody who identifies differently. And it was a blind spot for me. Like when I did my research, I didn't look at, say self-management, like, or wholeness. What does that do? If you're a woman inside an organization, and how is that different from being a man? Like, and so, that today would be like a really fascinating inquiry for me, and the same around race and all sorts of other aspects. Like, if you have practices around self-management, like, does this magically, level the playing field in power or not? And obviously the answer is probably not. There's subcultural components that are still very present. And so how do we go about these things? So that is fascinating to me now, and wasn't part of the book. The other thing that I find myself thinking a lot about now, that isn't part of the book, is this sense of adventure. So I think what shines through the book is that, teal ways of organizing, if you want to call them that, can make for just so much more meaning. But I often find myself talking with leaders, who are sort of on the cusp of wanting to do that, right? And talking about like this sense of adventure of, well, you could continue the traditional way. Sometimes people ask me, like, how can I convince my boss to do this? And I say, like, I don't believe in convincing. That just doesn't work. You can't show them, even if you were to show them that this brings better return on investment, that will not, sway anybody. But instead, it's sort of asking the question, like, one question I often ask leaders is, how many more years do you have in the corporate world, right? And depending on how old they are, to tell me whatever, 10 more years or 15 more years. And then I ask them, so how many more meetings will you sit in, right? And almost every time they start laughing, but it's sort of this like horrible laugh where they go like, oh, and I'm like, so you have this choice, you could continue in business as usual. You have 10 more years of these meetings. Like, how, exciting is that? Or you could just go a whole different route, right? And so that's for me, like, sort of the sense of adventure of like, I have 10 more years, in this, while these 10 years could be entirely different from what I've known, right? And so really cultivating these qualities as leaders to go on this adventure and take these risks. And one of the things that I find myself talking with people often is like this notion that as leaders, we are seen as people who are supposed to have all the answers, right? Otherwise, we're a fraud. Like if I'm in a leadership position and I don't have all the answers, then maybe I shouldn't have been promoted here, right? So I have to constantly project that I have all the answers. But all of the quests that are really worthwhile, right? If you say like, we'll radically reinvent our organization from a managerial perspective, or we'll just completely change our business model in order to do less harm to the planet, or whatever it is, these questions are so big that of course I don't have all the answers, right? And the question is, can I be excited about an adventure for which I don't know the path yet, right? And for which I don't have all the answers. One of my sort of old-time heroes is this guy called Ray Anderson. Unfortunately, he passed away. Some of you might know him. He was the CEO of Interface. Interface is the world's largest carpet manufacturer. They sort of, pioneered these square carpets that you see in offices everywhere. And as a 60-year-old, like he was already at the end of his career, he had created this thing, the world's biggest carpet manufacturer. He was like, this, big time success. And he had an environmental epiphany, awakening. He suddenly realized like his business was to take 1.2 billion pounds of material from the earth, mostly, oil and gas, transform it into endless plastic, yarn that then becomes these carpets that I used 5 or 10 years and then land on the landfill. And so he said, like, he went from thinking he was a hero, creating the world's largest, to thinking like, I should be in prison. Like, what is this business I'm doing? And what I find so fascinating, I never met him, but like the reason I love this man is that he was willing to engage his leadership team with this really problematic question and say, the only objective worthwhile for me is a crazy objective, which is not take anything from the earth that is not renewable, meaning the whole business that they're in, has to be reinvented and not do any harm to the planet. And he had no idea on how to get there, but he was able to have this dream and say, of course, I don't have any answers. That's the exciting part. That's why it's an adventure, right? And he made his leadership team quite uncomfortable in the beginning. And they were joking with him and were saying like, are we going to raise, sheep and goat and going to make are we going to make woolen carpets, or, and he said, I don't know, we'll find out, and it launched him on sort of a 20-year journey of invention, innovation. And now they're there, they're pretty much there with these crazy objectives, right? Mm-hmm. But what I find so interesting about this is, he was 60. He could have decided to live out, the last 5-10 years in his business life. But instead, like, this made his life so much more interesting. Mm-hmm. Right? This became like actually the most interesting 20 years of their lives. And so the question I'm pondering a lot when I'm talking with other leaders and for myself is like, how are we going to make the next 10, 20 years the most exciting of our lives, right? And I think the only way we can do that is by dreaming big adventures for which we have no answers yet, right? How sad if we're going to do the next 10 or 20 years only looking at small questions for which we already have the answers, right? And so yeah, if I had to rewrite the book, I would put in more of that perspective of adventure in there.
It sounds like we can expect a part 2 of the book, Frederic.
No, I don't think so. Maybe one of you wants to write it.
Yeah. Well, coming back, actually, I want to come back to this story of Ray Anderson, because I remember we touched on this when we had our conversation 2 years ago here in Teal Around the World as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself here.
Yeah, no worries. I think you did, you alluded to the story of interface, and, we were talking about turning the hard questions into inspiring quests and our lives to a life of integrity, right? And yeah. Where do you sit with this inquiry today? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, the metaphor that came up for me a number of years ago is that we are in these very strange and interesting times where all of the systems that we participate in are starting to crumble, are rotten, right? We need to reinvent not only our management systems, but our financial systems, our agricultural systems, more broadly our food systems, our education system, all our justice system. And we need to, and so I find myself out of integrity a lot simply by, I think my children should be in a different, they're an amazing school, but even that school, like I would want, I think we just fundamentally need to reinvent schools, and where I live, that doesn't exist. I still buy so much plastic from the supermarket because where I live, some of these alternatives aren't present. And I'm still flying, once a year because I live in the US and I go to Europe. And so there's just things, and I find myself thinking a lot about like, how do we live both in truth and in joy? Meaning, how can I really look at these systems and be aware of the systems I participate in? So how can I open the lid and really look at what's there and not fool myself? Yeah. And yet also accept that there's a limit to how much I can change, and an acceptance that, I can't live completely off grid, and so how can I live in truth and also in joy, and saying, I've reinvented that part of my life, and next year I'm going to reinvent that other part of my life. And these other things, I live sort of out of integrity, and that's okay. But sort of the commitment I made to myself is to try not to lie to myself, but to be honest of like, hey, I'm participating in this system that is, that I'm in disagreement with. But right now, that's not my focus, because my focus is, here. That's my contribution. And for me, that comes with a joyful part, is to realize, like, actually, there's millions of people out there working on all of these things. There's people who are working on reinventing the justice system and making restorative justice, and there's people working on reinventing the school systems, and there's people working, and so I don't need to do it all. Like, I can focus on what is my contribution for the next 2 or 3 years, and just trust and relax that, hey, there's millions of other people, like-minded people, who are doing the rest, and we're all advancing.
That's really beautiful. And I think, for us, I've done the week 2 times in a space of 1.5 years or so. And like you said, doing things in both truth and joy doesn't mean you have to do everything and change the entirety of your life, right? And just find joy in what you can influence and what you can do in the present, and do it really well. So that was what really came up for me when we went into the second cohort, and I appreciated that, because you don't feel like you're condemning yourself.
Yeah, I think just guilt and the opposite of that, which is blame, isn't helping us, right? And so we often feel guilty, and then we blame it on the outside, and we say, like, hey, billionaires and fossil fuel companies, and obviously they're to blame for a lot of things, but in many ways that just acts as a way not to contact our own guilt. But that guilt, isn't necessarily very useful. I think it's much more useful to be, again, truthful, really looking at the systems we participate in, and say, like, hey, these systems, I haven't designed them. I'm trapped in them, and there's only so much energy I have to extricate myself from this part and extricate myself from that part, and the other parts, I'm still playing along, and that's okay. And I won't go into guilt, because I'm doing my part here. I'll be joyful, and I will be grateful to all the other people who are doing all the other parts.
Thank you. Yeah, you know what, Fred, I want to go back a little quickly to reinventing organizations, to Teal, because there are questions coming from our community here. And the one question, which I think resonates a lot, is if you were not allowed to use the word Teal to describe Teal, how would you describe the concept to someone who doesn't know anything, absolutely nothing about it, in maybe 3 words if you want?
Yeah, I have no answer for that. I find it very difficult. I mean, as a lot of you, I imagine, I've been debating about using a model like this and using colors, right? Because obviously any model is a simplification and can be overused and can be misused. Right. So I don't actually talk about Teal that much myself, because often it gets misunderstood, or and I struggle, when people ask me, can you say what reinventing an organization is about in 1 sentence? Like I struggle to do it. So I sometimes say that every major historical era has had its way for people to think about how to come together and do work, how to collaborate, right? And we've had that for the agrarian area, and we had it for the scientific area, and now we have it for the knowledge area. And it seems like we're on the cusp of another area, another era, and wouldn't it be cool to actually try and understand what collaboration looks like in this new era, and sort of that's what this is about.
Thank you. There's another question, and I just want to come back to our audience as well, talking about purpose. And I know in your conversation with Tim a couple of weeks ago, you're not a big fan of personal purpose, right? So I think the question is more of, what is a practical way to figure out a life purpose? What would be your advice on that?
Yeah, just not to be misunderstood, what I meant was, personally, I just believe much more in that I don't know what my purpose is, all I can do is sense and listen to what shows up for me now. And maybe that will carry me for another year or two, and then I won't know. So the idea that there's one life purpose doesn't work for me. It might work for other people. You know, I know some people who are just like, I'm an educator, and they know that they will do that all their lives. And that's, you know, and that's great. If they find that clarity, you know, then that's great. What I think what it was reacting against was sometimes a little bit sort of hollow workshops where, you know, you're promised like in one day you will find your life's purpose, and then at the end you're supposed to craft this one sentence and then declare it to everyone else, and then everybody sort of feels uneasy, and you know, so it was more that kind of thing. So again, you know, if you're somebody who knows I'm this, you know, that's great. If you're more like me, of like, you know, this might change, and right now I feel like this is coming up, then the question is, you know, what are the practices to listen within, right? And there are all sorts of practices. You know, for some people, it's, you know, it's taking time in the woods. For other people, it's meditation. You know, for other people, it's prayer. For other people, it's working with, you know, a person who is very good at doing whatever, channeling. And so, you know, there's just all sorts of practices. There's also simply the way of going out and testing things. One book that was influential for me years ago when I left McKinsey was the book called Working Identity from Herminia Barrier. She looks at people who make major career changes. And she says, like, the most successful people, they actually don't do a deep introspection. What they do is actually lots of tests. You know, they do some volunteering here, they help somebody there, and then they feel their way into a new identity and into sort of a new field that feels purposeful. So I don't think there's a unique answer. It can be meditation and prayer and channeling and walking in the woods, and it can be testing, and it can be talking to people. So
yeah. There's a lot of fascinating side conversations on the chat, so I'll let you read that afterwards, because it's quite interesting and it's deep. But I do have one question, Frederic, and maybe this will help us segue into your new project. What's in the world that is currently inspiring you?
For me, it's, you know, where I get my hope from is simply connecting to all the people who are reinventing stuff. You know, a farmer, you know, ninth generation farmer who suddenly decides to go into regenerative farming, like, you know, that gives me the chills. Like, that's just amazing. You know, somebody who says, like, I'm done teaching the old way and you would do it this way. You know, parents who are parenting their children in non-violent ways and suddenly go, like, I've deconstructed. I no longer, you know, expect my child to obey because that's not even a notion that makes sense to me anymore. Like, wow, you know, just if you take that topic of parenting, like, I don't know about you, but I have so many examples around me when I look at my friends and their parents and their grandparents, the degree to which trauma is diminishing so often from one generation to the next just gives me immense hope, right? Everything that we know now about trauma and all the ways we now know to heal trauma, like my parents, you know, they were quite a bit older than I was, and all that existed at the time was psychoanalysis, and it didn't do, both of them did it, and I think it messed them up more than, you know, than how they started with. And that was all that was available. And when I see now everything that's available, like, you know, I'm waiting for somebody to put out this dream of saying, could we stop generational trauma in 1 or 2 generations? Imagine that dream. You know, I think it can be done. I think we could, you know, not for 100% of the population, but maybe for 50% of the population, we could dream of stopping generational trauma in 1 or 2 generations, right? So all of these things just give me immense hope. And I, you know, that's what I think John and Macy is alluding to. We live in these incredible times where we're racing to destruction, and at the same time, we have these incredible breakthroughs and opportunities. And you know, which one of them will go faster, right? And so I, you know, that's just fascinating for me. So I get immense inspiration from all the people who are in any of these fields, you know, breaking the status quo and bringing more consciousness into the world.
Yeah, thank you for that. And really, when I look back at the panel earlier as well, and the other sessions before, there's a lot of conversation around hope for a better world, hope for a better generation, for the next generation, actually, a better legacy left over to that. And I think if I can speak for most of us who are here in Teal around the world, there is that recurring pattern of a hope for a better world and a hope for a better tomorrow. So I think that's why we're all bonded here, and so you're really grateful for you sharing that. There's a question also again coming from our audience here. Is there any challenge that you see, like you mentioned like reimagining a different way to live things? Do you think there are things outside of organizations that can probably be solved easier or differently with Teal?
So you mean any other domain than organizations?
Yeah, or challenges that you see that we can apply kind of a Teal lens to that.
I mean, every one of them. I mean, if we believe that we are in one of these sort of historical changes, and they will apply to everything. So, if you're a doctor, what would Teal medicine look like? I'm not exactly sure, but I know it would be a medicine that transcends and includes. So it would not be opposed to, scientific, modern medicine, but would be a holistic medicine and would include everything that, I mean, there's studies that show that if you're in a hospital room and your room overlooks nature, as opposed to your room that overlooks a brick wall, you heal faster, right? I mean, isn't that crazy? Like just seeing nature makes us heal. Like, if we were to take that seriously and so many other things, like how would medicine look like? I mean, isn't that cool, right? And if you're an educator, like what does Teal education look like? And, and if so in any domain, and for all of us who are parents or simply, who are in a committed relationship with, like, what does that look like, to relate to people in a non-possessive way? And like, so in every single one of these domains, I think, that applies. And of course, the smaller the structures, the easier it is. So, in your relationship or with your children, it's somewhat easier than changing a whole organization or changing, the political system of a country. But I think it applies to all of these scales.
Yeah, so it just brings me back to a question of your new project, for example. Did you ever consider, and maybe before we go in there, you can tell us a little bit about the week and all of that? Because my question is really, did you put a Teal lens as you navigated this new project of yours?
Yeah. So maybe, in a nutshell, so what is the week? So the week was a project that started 3 years ago, but we just launched like a month and a half ago. So, it was 3 years of preparation. You participated in one of the test versions like 2 years ago as we were preparing this, but this was sort of like a small, test version. So the week was started when I, 3 years ago, had my own deeper awakening to the climate emergency and just the destruction that we're bringing to the living world. And I just got fascinated by this question of like, so basically 3 years ago for me, it went from here to here. Like I knew all of this, I live in a freaking eco-village, I knew about climate change. I wasn't a climate denier, but at some level I was still in denial. At some level I was still like, don't want to really deal with this like this, But 3 years ago, we decided, my wife and I, let's really find out, and so it really went from here to here, and that's when we decided, okay, we need to close the chapters on the things we're working on and really focus our attention on this, and so we designed the week, and so the week is sort of an answer to the question of like, how come that we're, going straight into the wall, and that we don't have mass mobilization yet of a scale that is needed. Right? How come that we don't have millions of people inside workplaces saying, we will change our business model, we will change our practices? How come, right? How come we don't have millions of people in the street? How come that we don't vote differently from what we do? And the realization was, the current way that we engage around this topic isn't working, right? This way of saying to people, just we give you the facts and then you will wake up and act isn't working, right? But that's sort of the dominant model that the climate space uses is, one more report from the United Nations, IPCC, one more scientific report. And if only that report is alarmist enough, then people at some point will wake up and they will act. And we know from social science that doesn't work, right? It's actually, most of the time it's counterproductive, is most of us go then into sort of defense mode of like, I don't want to engage with it. So the problem is not so much the access to information as creating a space where it feels safe enough to engage with this information. Right. And I think that's where maybe the teal lens comes in, is in how we design the week as this much more sort of holistic approach. And so what is the week? The week is an experience. So it's not a book, it's not a documentary, it's an experience, a group experience that I invite all of you to do if you want to do it. And so what you do is you invite friends or family or colleagues or whatever, your sports club or in your church, your mosque, your synagogue, wherever is a group that you feel comfortable with. You invite them to meet 3 times in a week. That's why we call it the week, right? And each time, it's very simple. It's self-facilitated. You watch a film together, a 1-hour episode of a sort of documentary that we wrote and produced. And then after that, we set you up for a self-guided conversation. So we propose some simple rules that I guess everybody here, would know. Everybody speaks in turn, no interruption. So we set up some ground rules to make it a safe space to have a good conversation. And then we give you a question. And the 3 episodes are written to make you experience sort of a U-shaped journey, so that you find in all rite of passages, in all initiatory journeys, since the dawn of time, that you find in Otto Scharmer's theory, right? And so it's basically sort of a grief process where we help everyone face the reality of what's coming. So finally really take it in, have it go from here to here, feel it in every cell of your body, but in a space that feels safe enough, where all of the emotions that most likely will show up, which might be shock, fear, anger, guilt, where you process them, because we create, we help you process them in the films and in the conversations. So you go down that and then you start deconstructing at the bottom of the U a lot of the things that we've been deconstructing with reinventing organizations, but this time, sort of on the climate. And then we come out of the U full of energy and with clarity around like what we want to do, and energy to do our part in this adventure. Because my sense is, whether we want it or not, how we're going to deal with this dying planet and the climate crisis is going to be the defining adventure of the next 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, it's, there's no escaping it. This will define our experience in the next 10 to 20, 30 years. And I'm convinced that the younger generations, our children, and maybe one day grandchildren, will ask us, like, what did you know? And what did you do? And I want to be able to say, I had the courage to look at it, and I had clarity, and I was part of what promises to be the biggest adventure that humanity has known, rather than saying like, I continued like, not really dealing with it and stayed on the sideline while everybody else was having fun, trying to turn this around. So this is basically what the week is. It's sort of an entry door. And yeah, we had 5,000 people that did sort of this test version that you did. It went viral before we were even ready. And now we've launched it a month and a half ago. And we've had another, few thousand people already, register. And the response we get is phenomenal. I think, there's, we just offer this really honest, simple, beautiful, deep space to grapple with these questions. And we hear from so many people who say like, this is the deepest conversations I've ever had with my friends, or colleagues, or whatever the topic. Like, we rarely have these really deep spaces where we don't interrupt each other, but actually feel and talk and, and make sense of one of the big questions of our time. And so, so the week is meant to make that easy. So if you like have never really grappled with this, or maybe you have grappled, but your friends and family don't understand you and go like, why, why are you always talking about the climate or something? You can just simply invite them and then let sort of the week do the work for you, because, you don't have to, convince people into anything. So I'm curious, Ria, so you did it twice, right? And I think you did twice sort of the very rough test version of it, right?
Yes, we did a prototype and we did the new videos. Yeah.
We did the new one too. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, so we did it 3 weeks ago. So I was the mean girl who organized it on a Friday night.
Okay.
So it also like for us it was at least for me, having done it the first time and the second time, there's a difference because your state of mind is different, and your willingness to be open, to sit with it, and to sit with the emotions that confront you is different as well. The first one was really emotional for us as a whole team when we gathered together, because we didn't know what we were getting
You did
ourselves
it in the workplace, right? You did it with colleagues, right?
Yes, we did it with colleagues. Yes, and the second time we did it 3 weeks ago. We wanted to test out the new videos and but also bring on board some of our colleagues who are new to the organization. It was different in a sense of I knew what I was going into, but I still had stuff that I needed to work out for myself. But also, we all had our piece of the journey, let's say. And I don't think in the evolutionary state, it's always going to be, there's something in there that triggers you to think differently.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that, you were one of the first to test it, and then, you even, contributed financially to make it happen, as part of sort of an employee purpose, decision. So that, that was really beautiful. And yeah, for those of you who work in organizations, we already get a lot of tractions for people to do it inside the workplace. So we talk about the week at home and the week at work and the week at faith and, the week at campus. So, you can bring it into all these different places. And we already have like a lot of beautiful stories of people bringing it into the workplace in all sorts of different ways. You have sort of like people spread it grassroots and they just organize something and they don't ask for any permission and just book a meeting room, 3 days in a row and just organize it. But we also have like some organizations who sort of formally invite everyone in the organization to go through it as a way to really sort of make a step change and accelerate, the sort of the consciousness and the transformation of the organization. And in other organizations, make it sort of a formal plan, and it becomes a training program. So there's like tons of different ways of doing it. And we also have a lot of traction already from like more people who are coaches and consultants and who bring it to their clients. The 3 sessions don't really need a facilitation because they're self-facilitated, but it's always good to have a facilitator in a room if you want. But mostly the role then for coaches and consultants is to wrap their expertise around the week, and then often they facilitate like a 4th session to like at the end of session 3, typically people are all energized and go like, okay, we want to do our part, but then now how do we do this within the organization? How do we link to existing sustainability initiatives, or how do we create new ones? And so that's where then, the role of coaches and consultants comes in, and they can help channel that energy.
I think one thing that I would say was really I think what was really impactful for me is the fact that it made me reflect on my own patterns and my own sense of apathy to the topic, because like you said, like if it's too heavy, you don't want to engage with it. But if you're sitting there with a group of people that you care about and you start reflecting on what would that mean for my niece, or for my, for someone who's going to be around my age when these changes happen, it just becomes confrontational, and then you would want to change that reality. And I think that's the sense that I really felt was different. And I feel like if individuals within an organization who actually engage with this and have that personal sense of commitment or shift that they want to do, how cool would it be to see organizations changing from the groundswell of this movement, right? So I think that's real.
Yeah, one of the things that, so, you know, as much as we put love and work into the documentaries, you know, I'd never done films, I'd never scripted for films, and it was like a whole, you know, stretch to do this. Actually, the magic doesn't happen in the films, but happens in the conversations afterwards. I don't know if that you would echo that. And then even in the time in between, so you can't binge watch, right? So you have to let at least 24 hours between these episodes. And we know that, and, you know, people just, you know, why was I saying that? Now I forgot my train of thought. What were you saying just before? Because I was
saying like how important it is when the individuals are reflected and committed, and how they bring that and show up in the organizations that they work with.
Yeah. So one of the important things is that you're not allowed to do the week alone. You have to do it as a group, because that makes all the difference, right? If I really grapple with this and I wake up to the urgency and I go like, okay, this is becoming central in my life, but my family or friends or my colleagues haven't gone through the same journey, they're going to look at me like they don't recognize me. They're really like, Fred, what's happening to you? You've become this green tree hugger. Like, you know, they will try to pull me back to the old Fred that they know. And so the chances of me actually doing something, you know, is pretty small. Whereas if my friends, family, or colleagues are part of that, and we all go through this together, right, things are going to be much easier, right? And that's why, you know, inside organizations, there is something really powerful about people doing it together, right? And you can do it in small groups, but you can also do like, you know, 200 people together, and then you have them, you know, have conversations in subgroups. And there's something powerful about a group of 8 or a group of 50 or 100 or 200 people or even more, all at the same time grappling with this. And then they've seen this, and for 24 hours when they meet each other, they all like, you know, have this shared reference, and they like, and then they go into episode 2 together. And, you know, it you know, that's really where a lot of the magic happens. Yeah, and one more thing that I wanted to share, because you talked about like, you know, your niece, or one of the things that we've tried to do in the films is to break that fourth wall. You know, like in most documentary films, it's as if you, a viewer, you know, the participant doesn't exist, right? And whereas we keep breaking that fourth wall and keep telling you, like talking to you, like we started episode 1 by saying, hey, welcome. You know, you're probably there sitting with a group at home or at work, and now, you know, this is what we're going to do together, and we're going to go into episode 1, and episode 1 is the hard one, but, you know, trust us, because, you know, and so we keep talking. And one of the things we do that you were referring to with your niece is we ask people to calculate how old will you be in 2050. And then we ask them to calculate how old is a child that's important in your life, a niece, a nephew, or your, you know, your own child if you have children, or a grandchild, or, you know, and how old will they be in 2050? And we try to just make it really personal about, like, you know, what will this mean for us, for the people that we love. So we don't talk about, you know, ice sheets melting and stuff happening far away. We try to, you know, ask the question, like, what will happen to us in our lives. And I think that's what makes it sort of relatable and personal, rather than some expertise-driven thing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interest to form groups of the week sessions in the chat, as I'm seeing. And thank you, Travis, for putting out that Excel sheet where we can connect with each other, and hopefully we can run a few sessions of the week with different groups. Depending on time zone, of course. That's always the tricky part. So yeah,
TLVs around the world, that would be so cool.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much for this response. I think it has been very impactful for us as a small organization. How much more if you calculate and multiply that over like larger organizations. So thank you for this gift once again, Frederic. And yeah, we have 6 minutes left, and I just want to shoot a few more questions. People have been adding to the Mentimeter. There's one that is a quick one. You mentioned a playlist. So what's on your playlist, Frederic? Just to lighten this up a bit.
Oh, I have so many different playlists. So at some point I transferred my 400 CDs onto, MP3s, and then I made like these super fine-grained mood playlists. That was before Spotify existed. Now I could, so I have like quiet and quietly upbeat and an upbeat, and like, and so just depending on my mood, I have all these different these different playlists. I'm into sort of alternative indie music, so that's sort of my thing. A lot of Belgian bands that I used to like, and yeah.
Great. There's one thing that's maybe a crossover between your life and your work with reinventing organizations and the week, which is a question on how do you see teal and regenerative leadership working together to create the changes that we need from the world and we want to see in the world.
Yeah, I mean, what I hope is that we as leaders, in this space, have the courage to really look into the world we live in, like what I talked earlier about, like truth and joy, and just acknowledge about how destructive the work we do in organization is, and not shy away from that. Like, one of the reasons I love Patagonia is not so much because of all the things they do, but even though they do amazing things, they acknowledge that they're still destructive. They're really honest about, like, with everything they do, they still have a negative impact on the planet. And again, not to beat ourselves up, but just to be honest about this. I think one of the most dangerous things that we have, that are happening right now is this amount of greenwashing we have, right? Of doing sort of a little spin, and a lot of the purpose thing is so yucky. I mean, making like a little spin on, not that they're worse than anyone else, but I'm thinking like, Coca-Cola and their purpose is to bring happiness to the world. And you're going like, seriously? Like, like, I mean, Coca-Cola is massively destructive on so many levels. I mean, they're responsible for X% of all the plastic in the world, and they're responsible for so much obesity, and they're responsible for, I mean, it's crazy, for what they do with the water. And then your purpose is happiness. I mean, yes, because you do billions of dollars of advertising, because otherwise no one would buy your product. And in those advertising, you show happy people just to make people feel miserable. So, and go like, oh, but I'm so miserable, so if I only buy Coca-Cola, I will be happy. I mean, it's all completely fucked up. And so my question is, can we as leaders be truthful with this and not make a fake regenerative purpose on top of our organizations? But can we be honest with ourselves and say like, yeah, this is where we're in, and it might be a 5, 10, 20-year journey, just like Ray Anderson, to reorient this thing, and we're going to dedicate ourselves to it. And I have immense respect for people who stay in these industries and in these organizations and change them from the inside. Like I know for myself that I didn't have that courage. Like for me, it was easier to go on the outside and do stuff from the outside. And that's great. And we need people like me. But I have immense respect for people who stay inside these organizations and change them. But then I would say, like, please don't do, fake purpose. Go for the real thing.
Thank you so much, Frederic. I see 2 hands flying, and I'm a little bit torn because we're at the 1 minute. So I'm gonna have to ask Dima and Antonio if we can combine your question. That would be great.
I don't know. Let's see if there's serendipity.
Let's do that. Dima, do you want to go ahead and shoot your question first?
Yeah, I'll try to be super quick. Really inspiring. Thank you for your work, Frederic. One thing that is bugging me even today is that we have so much philosophy, so much knowledge, and we talk so much, right? And my question is going like, well, are we too smart, right? We're going like, I told somebody today that we have to read like 30 books just from today alone. So like, and even your book is so amazing, but it's very deep. So what, in your opinion, is like the most practical step 1, super real in the world things we have to be doing? right? Like I want to do a teal accelerator and like start companies from scratch, but like, what do you think is like the most practical step one thing?
Yeah, can I hear the second question and then see if I can combine them? Or thank you.
Antonia, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Frederic, congratulations for the initiative. My question is, Frederic, what is preventing us from getting critical mass on adoption of teal principles? We have a very disruptive time with the COVID, and we are still not getting a lot of traction. Your thoughts are appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, boy, I don't know if I have answers for any of you. For Dima, you know, if there was, hey there, if there was one thing, you know, that was the same for everyone, I hope I would know it. So my sense is, you know, I agree with you. You know, sometimes I'm tired of reading and I'm tired of talking and I just want to do stuff. And the week was my way, like that's my contribution. I'm just going to do it. I don't know how to make documentary films. I don't know how to do fundraising. I'll just go and do it, you know. So my sense for you, Dima, is like, you probably know the answer. And it sounds like it might already be this accelerator, or it might be something else, right? I feel like there's this constant interplay between us advancing in our consciousness and books and talking help. But then if that stays there, you know, it becomes, you know, in French, we have a horrible word, which is, I'm still going to say it's mental masturbation. And so we at some point have to go from that to, you know, actually, you know, doing stuff. And then at some point we do stuff and then we're ready to take that next step in our consciousness. And it sounds like you're ready to do stuff. So just go do it. And you probably know what the answer is. And Antonio, I don't know what's preventing us. Maybe some other people have better answers than me and then put them in the chat. You know, ultimately, it takes one person at a time to wake up to this. Where I get my hope from, we talk about that in the week, is, you know, when you look at historic shifts, you know, a lot of stuff has happened in the background and people move away from an old story to a better story, but it feels like nothing is moving. And then suddenly, you know, a few more people and suddenly the whole system shifts. And it goes, you know, so it takes much longer than we think, but then it also shifts much faster than we think. And we haven't seen it happen because it's like all stuff happening in the background. And so, you know, that's where at some point I go like, this is a big mystery and I can only do my part. And whenever I go into like, how can I shift the whole system? I go like, whoa, I'm thinking too big, like I'm becoming hubristic. You know, I can only do my part and trust that other people are doing their part and trust that at some point this thing will shift and it's all a big mystery. And you know, that answer might not be satisfying to you, but that's my way of staying sane in this world.
Thanks, Frederic. It looks like your message, there's a tipping point coming soon, hopefully. Thank you.
Who knows?
Thank you so much for your questions, Antonio and Dima and Frederic. We're now 3 minutes past the top of the hour, but this has been a really refreshing conversation. Thank you so much for bringing joy and bringing your whole self into like onto this adventure that we are on. And we are very happy that we could build on your story of what you started, and we can journey with you and evolve with you in the week as well. So thank you for taking the time out of your holiday to be with us today. And I hope you, you have a really nice time with Helen and the kids. And to everyone who is in here, there's a whole lot more in store for all of you.